Welcome everybody. I'm Nicola Barrett, Chief Corporate Learning Officer at Emory Executive Education at Goizueta Business School, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar on transformative times, opportunities with data and AI. And this is such a critically important topic for business people, whether or not you are in technology roles or more importantly, you are a manager, you're a leader, you're an executive in an organization. Upskilling and understanding the power of data and analytics and AI is such an incredibly important competence today. And it's one that we can't overlook, regardless of where you are in your career, whether it's 5 years to retirement or 5 years into your career. This is such a critically important topic. And to help us with understanding this, two very wonderful guests today, Guru Kashyap, who is the Managing Director in PwC's Consulting Solutions and leads the Workforce Analytics practice. He was previously at Mercer, a Marsh McLennan company, as their Global Chief Data and Analytics Digital Officer, and he drove commercial data monetization priorities in their human capital business. And that was 6 months before the advent of ChatGPT. He spearheaded the delivery and launch of a Gen AI-infused product. And prior to that, he was the Chief Product Officer in Deloitte Digital and at a PE-backed SoftBank company. So he is amazingly well qualified to be part of this conversation today. The other person that I have with me today is Professor David Schweidel. David is a professor in marketing and the Goizueta Chair in Business Technology. And David's research and teaching is in the areas of customer relationship management, social media analytics. His research focuses on the development and application of statistical models to understand customer behavior and inform managerial decisions. And David teaches in our executive education professional development programs, as well as in a number of the degree programs. And he has been one of the faculty behind designing and developing a suite of online courses that we're going to launch next month, which we're very excited about. But this is a conversation about AI and data and analytics, and I wanted to start off with asking Guru a question about sharing your journey in the field of data analytics and AI. If you can give a little bit about how did you get interested in it and what was your journey to today?
Awesome. Thanks, Nicola. And David, nice meeting you here. Looking forward to the conversation. Very exciting topic, right? As always these days, we can't have any conversation without AI. So my journey, probably I'm dating myself over here, started when I came out of college, was writing neural network programming. I started off as a data scientist. I'm still a recovering one, as I claim, and have been pretty much in the tech and data field for quite a few years. After that, moved on into the engineering side. I worked over here in the wireless industry in Atlanta, and was part of working on switch data records, call data records. Back then, didn't know, right? Big data was a thing, and that's exactly what we were working on. And then moved on after my MBA into product and tech-based roles. And over the years, having done like 15 different product roles, 15 years of product roles, what I have seen is more and more products that are data-centric is essentially what we have been working with our clients on. And that's essentially got me, pivoted from looking at data as an enabler to data as a product or data as a service, as we call. And that's essentially over the last several years I've been consulting and was, as you mentioned, right, Chief Data Analytics Officer most recently. And currently in my role at PwC, I lead our workforce analytics practice. So I've been essentially part of data analytics and AI over the years, and along with the change in industry and the ability for compute, we have been working more closely with the business.
Thank you. David, do you want to share your journey?
Sure. I grew up in the Northeast, and being from the Northeast, if you have a kind of proclivity toward math, the career that they tell you you can go down is to be an actuary. Well, I did that for a couple of summers and determined that it wasn't for me. But I was fortunate enough to kind of be steered toward marketing, basically with the premise that I was going to use the same analytic tools, but for less morbid and potentially more interesting questions. And I think, I've been fortunate over, gosh, going on 20 years in this career to be able to see how marketing has become increasingly data driven. I think we're now at a point where marketing may be the largest kind of consumers of data within an organization. And then more recently, kind of with AI being top of mind for everyone, well, the power of what you can get out of that AI is contingent on the data that's underlying those models.
Got to remember to unmute still after all of these years of being online. So, Guru, how has the role of data analytics evolved in the organizations that you've worked in, especially over the last few years?
Yeah. So I think, one thing that we have been seeing more recently is from an evolution perspective, data moving more from structured data into an unstructured space, right? So I would say that's probably number one trend. Previously, you had to be a data scientist. You had to have, right, tools that are more specialist in being able to process that structured data. Now there is, especially with Gen AI and even before, there's a whole lot of opportunity to process unstructured data. So that's a big thing. The second trend is what I call as the democratization of tools, right? So a couple of years ago, this concept of a citizen data scientist started happening, where how do we get the tools in the hands of the end users to make sure that they can do their own dashboarding, analysis, and now more of low code platforms, right, to be able to get all of that going. So more and more availability of tools and compute, that's another huge evolution. And the third one and final, probably I would say, is more around data moving from dashboards and visualization into more analytics, AI, ML capability. Now, whatever we used to do as a data scientist, those tools are available for the end user. So initially the dashboard got friendly to the end user. Then the data got friendly to the end user. Now it's the turn of AI and ML capabilities, like all of us are using, right, directly on chat GPTs and so on.
Yeah,
And where? Oh, go on, David. Sorry.
I completely agree with Guru on this, on kind of that those series of points that he made. We're accustomed to the structured data, but the lion's share of the data that's out there, whether it's internal corporate data like employee reviews or employee notes, if we're talking about a B2B context of notes on the relationship that they have with particular clients, or we're looking at external data, whether it's social media posts, product reviews, just the sheer volume of unstructured data is enormous. And as research has demonstrated, there's a lot that can potentially be gained from that data. The challenge has been kind of those barriers to entry for people that we used to have those kind of standalone units of, I have the data science team and I have the business unit that the data science team is partnering with. And there was almost that need for someone that could sit in the middle and be conversant with both sides, whether it was the person in the business unit who knew enough to be able to converse with data science, or the data scientist who knew enough about how the results would be used to converse with the business unit. And what we're seeing is, yes, that model still exists, but with generative AI being available, it's much easier for one person to kind of be able to kind of work that entire pipeline.
Totally. And David, just to add on to that, the way you described in terms of initially, right, these tools were more for specialists. And in one of my recent projects, when we started off on this Gen AI journey, right, it's a small product team, product manager, data scientist, AI ML engineers, right, data engineers, and so on. And For the traditional or predictive analytics, the data scientist played a huge role. The moment we shifted on to a Gen AI side, the questions were the prompt engineering role got embedded into a product management role. So product managers who are techno-functional started picking up those skills and now are able to essentially bring the product to life in a good, early stage MVP, POC, whatever you want to call, and then start refining along with the data scientists because you still obviously need them to be able to bring the end stage product to market.
And I think that's where we're going to see a lot in the, maybe I'll be curious about the timeline you would estimate, but I would imagine we're looking within 12 months, maybe 24 months, that life cycle of a project being expedited because we're able to work so much more efficiently. And whether it's product development, service development, we're seeing the same thing on the marketing campaign side of, before you think about the process of taking a product to market, all right, I've got the brief that's being delivered to the creative agency, and I've got this back and forth. Now I'm able to, even if I'm not the creative, I might be the marketer saying, this is the idea I have in my head. Let me give that as the brief, and just the number of iterations we need potentially being cut down significantly.
Totally, right? The whole payback period concept of, what the ROI, for any of your Gen AI capability, that has completely shrunk over the time, right? We used to say, in the PC revolution, it was like 10 years, to get eventually the productivity improvement. In the cloud era, we saw them come down to almost like 3 years. And now with AI ML, the payback period is literally in 12 to 18 months. That's essentially what we are seeing in being able to drive the ability of bringing these capabilities. Once these are in the hands of citizens, the citizen data scientists and the end users, the ability to transform is just outstanding.
And that's at the organizational level, that 18-month period that you mentioned.
Yep.
I would imagine we're going to see that kind of also translate to kind of the individual contributor level, right? Of, if I have that skill set, I'm able to be part of that 18-month period. So it creates just a lot of opportunities for people that already have one set of skills, whether you're coming from the data scientist perspective or from the business leader perspective, to be able to upskill and kind of augment their own capabilities.
Yep. Totally.
So I'm curious too. I mean, so that's got implications, as I sort of said at the start, for I think everybody in an organization, every professional, regardless of where they are in their career and where they are in an organization, you're going to have to rethink how you work, and then I think you're also going to have to rethink the work of others too, right? I mean, so I can foresee a bunch of challenges just with the speed of change. Can you maybe elaborate on that, Guru?
Yeah. So in terms of the skills, right? I mean, it's funny you should ask that question, Nicola. Like literally today, PwC, we launched a major report, our marquee report called Workforce Radar, right? Essentially to see what are organizations doing, and we have surveyed 20 plus thousand employees, business leaders like HR leaders, and line of business leaders, about 4,000 of them. And one of the concepts that we bring in over there is called the intelligent enterprise. So every organization, as we start becoming the tech enabled or a data driven organization, is essentially becoming the intelligent enterprise, where those skills, as you said, are needed in not only being able to work on finance or accounting or HR or marketing, the kinds of tools that you are able to bring on, right? So for instance, David, when you're working on the marketing side, to be able to use that to create your initial, demand generation emails, content creation, working with the ads, all of that first pass is done. Similarly, in case of HR, it's like creating that initial draft of a job description, policy documents. Now the question is, how do you create it within the confines of a secure, scalable organization, both from a tech and operations perspective? Those are some of the challenges that we are working.
David, do you see What are the challenges you see ahead of
I
us?
think one of the things that we have to be realistic about is what can the AI do? What is it suited for doing? And we've got to keep in mind, as kind of magical as it may seem in terms of what it's capable of producing, right? It's a computer program, right? It's a very well-trained computer program in that it has a wealth of data on which it's been developed in order to produce these responses. But we have to keep in mind what the objective was that it was designed with. So for example, a lot of the popular tools that are out there, whether it's ChatGPT or Claude, I'll talk, from a marketing standpoint, it wasn't designed to produce marketing content. Like it doesn't know my business objective is profit maximization, right? A lot of the large language models that people are familiar with, it's a statistical algorithm that predicts the next sequence of words that I should output. So if you're planning to use that in a particular way, you can, but you have to think about the way in which you're using it and how do you adapt that tool for that particular use case. I think the other thing that we've got to be very cognizant of is the role that the person has to play in this process, right? AI is a tool, just like the wheel was a tool, right? It's not like we can expect it to do everything on its own. And so I think the challenge is going to be, where is the person's time best spent? Where is it most effective for us to use AI, right? If we're writing boilerplate code or legal contracts, okay, AI is very good at taking care of those boilerplate sections. It may not be so good at the elements that are tailored to each particular application. And so that's where I think we're going to spend some time kind of figuring out kind of what's the right balance. Where do we deploy more human effort versus machine effort? I think the last point that I mentioned is I think we may see kind of team composition potentially change, or the specific roles as we're constructing a team. What's the mix of skills that I need? I'm not sure that you're going to say, oh, I need a prompt engineer per se, but I think what you will see is that I need someone who has that set of capabilities along with other capabilities as I'm putting these teams together.
Yeah, no, very well said. One of the major opportunities that we're seeing, consistently in the market is the upskilling side of it, right? Along with using the use cases specifically in AI-enabled products. So there are two aspects, right? One, as much as obviously there is a whole lot of momentum around Gen AI, and that's what everybody is talking about, that does not mean, right, the traditional or predictive AI is out, right? I mean, there are only a limited number of use cases for which Gen AI is the right tool. But when we start having conversations, when we have these workshops and identify use cases, though the conversation may have started because of Gen AI, there are a lot of use cases that we uncover where predictive AI, data strategy, enterprise level data governance, right? Being able to bring the tech and the cloud capabilities into it broadly from a digital transformation, that is a huge part of it. The good thing is, right, there is momentum in the industry behind Gen AI, but doesn't mean every problem has to be solved. In fact, you cannot solve every problem with Gen AI.
Right. Absolutely. And I think we're going to see more and more saying, okay, well, Gen AI is the bright, shiny object currently, but we need to bundle that with other components. So, like take the case of trying to personalize marketing communications. Yes, generative AI plays a role in allowing us to take things to scale that we might not have been able to before, but what's that personalization based on? Who am I sending these messages to? Well, that's where the predictive analytics needs to come into play. And the only way in which I have that capability to do predictive analytics to support personalization is if I have an underlying data strategy. Yeah. Right. And so again, this is just one more tool that's in our toolkit, but this is, you mentioned kind of the digital transformation. This is just kind of the next step, I think, in that transformation that we're seeing.
Absolutely.
So you've touched on a number of things. I'm curious. It seems like there's obviously a change management issue, right? We've got to help people upskill. We've got to help people think about what this algorithms are saying to us. How do we use them? When do we use them? So there's some upskilling around that. There's also awareness, obviously, around what decisions are you making based on outputs from these technology tools, and what are the sort of ethical considerations that we need to put in place and be thinking about. So how are you thinking about that, Guru, in your practice?
Yeah. So no, that is very much definitely the part of the overall solution, right? In terms of when we talk about AI. So from an ethics perspective, right? I mean, these go around by different names, right? Responsible AI, ethical AI, right? AI governance, and so on. The way we look at it is essentially there are like three lines of defense. The first line of defense starts at the product team level, right? So what used to be ML ops, now we are starting to talk about it as LLM ops. So to be able to understand model bias, right, the security, the privacy, all of those issues within that product team, that is essentially your first line of defense in terms of what the ethical concerns are, because one who's closest to it, that's where, right, you will be able to start mapping your business challenges into, right, model level challenges. The second line of defense is more at an enterprise level, right, across AI governance, and this is where your typical governance, compliance, risk management, enterprise risk tolerance, and making sure model approval is part of this process, right? So that's that second layer in which it gets in, right, from a line of defense perspective. And then finally, the third thing from a process standpoint, you still have to do your audits, right? Both your internal audits, your external audits, to be able to make sure that things that you have done in a certain way. So in that sense, this sort of process from an ethical AI is no different than what you would have done from a compliance for any other IT technology, security, and so on and so forth. It's just that you're looking at through the lens of AI in order to be able to, right, go through those parameters. But as always, right, it starts very close to the product team who's working on it. There is enterprise level, and then both external and internal audits.
David, any thoughts?
Yeah, thinking about kind of again, these tools that we provide, that we have. Part of our mission in the classroom and as well with executive education is we want to expose people to what a number of my colleagues have referred to as the art of the possible. And certainly with technology today, there's a lot that is possible. When it comes to AI, bundled with that conversation has to be kind of the ethical use, the responsible use. So it's not just a matter of saying, I can do this, but we also have to look at, should we be doing this? Is this something that we as an organization are comfortable with? Also, beyond just the financial impact of on the organization, we've also got to look at what is the broader impact that doing something may have on other potential stakeholders. And one piece that I'd add to it, Nicola, you mentioned kind of that change element. For years we've been seeing that from an organizational standpoint, it's not the analytic piece that we have to be mindful of, it's the people piece. Because you can have kind of say, hey, the analytics gave me the right answer, it told me what we should be doing, but somebody has to implement that within the organization. And so we have to have kind of leadership on board. We have to have key individuals within the organization on board and potentially willing to change. Same thing is playing out with AI. You look at what I'll call legacy companies saying, hey, we know that we can use AI, but let's assume that from a technical standpoint, we come up with a solution. Are they ready for that? And at least my perception in talking with a number of companies in the marketing space is there are a lot of companies that are not ready for it just at an organizational culture level. Guru, does that kind of jive with kind of your experiences with clients?
Yeah, no, so definitely, right? So what we have seen, and even in my prior, right, roles where, right, I was running data analytics organizations, when we created these governance boards, right? So there is, like you said, the stakeholder, the persona, right? So marketing and sales essentially representing the voice of the consumer,
Mm-hmm.
CHROs representing the voice of the employee, right?
Mm-hmm.
CIOs, CTOs representing the voice of the developer persona. Everybody's got to look out for, right, what persona you're representing and how are you bringing that voice on. That is the only way to bring on, right, the overall collective stakeholder input into, right, the model feedback, so we can essentially improve it from a, collective perspective.
So how do you? So I see that there's a lot of development in the world of the technologists, the data scientists. There are tools now that are more available. Then there are people like me who was like, okay, I'm using various Gen AI tools to because I feel like I have to, but I worry about them as if I'm just sort of using them as if they're a search, like glorified, a search tool on steroids. There seems to me to be a gap between those groups, and the more senior you are, you're directing the organization that you work for, with the unit within your organization. How do you bridge that gap between I've dabbled around with Gen AI to I really understand the capability or the opportunities that this technology affords us? How do we
Yeah.
bridge that?
Yeah, so back to your earlier comment on, right, the whole upskilling side of it. That is one area that we are definitely seeing. So in our the recent report that I was mentioning, right, PwC's Workforce Radar, we see that at the leadership level, right, there is a higher usage, and then at the individual contributor level, right, people just play with it, and then after a while it even drops off, right? So there is a lower level, lower share of, right, adoption from that perspective. So the way, right, that essentially is being worked on is from an upskilling perspective and targeting these at various personas within the organization, right? Some are going to be your influencers, to use a marketing term, right? Some are going to be your change enablers, and some actually are actually doing the activators, right, to be able to get. So what we have done in PwC is when we deploy these change upskill programs, we go after these various personas within the entire organization and make sure the technical folks are trained on, right, from a more detailed perspective, the end users to be able to look at it more from understanding the ethical implications. If you're doing it at a prompt level, what you ask for is essentially going to dictate the output, right? So getting that training everybody on to be able to use it, that is essentially what we are talking about. Yesterday I was on a call with a client, and very similar, right? The kind of transformation that happened on the digital side back then, we were sharing our examples of people didn't use Excel, right? Not everybody did formulas and all that inside your Excel. Similarly, over a period of time, right, mobile apps, it started off on the consumer side, and then slowly enterprise applications and so on started taking on. So same way right now on the AI side of it, we are getting as end users, consumers, right, exposure to this technology. All of that is currently being embedded as part of your business processes, transformation, business value, and how you bring that to the end consumer, end user. All of that is essentially what enterprises are working on, right, to bring it into.
Yeah, looking at it again from kind of an educator's side, I think there are different levels that we've got to be mindful of. Nicola, like you said, a lot of people are dabbling with it.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're using it as a search engine. My wife, who runs her own business, started using it within the last couple of months and has found it to be kind of transformational for her because it's saving her time. Right? It's taking
Mm-hmm.
tasks that it solves that blank sheet of paper problem, right?
Right.
Instead of kind of banging your head against the wall to get started, it's here's a first draft for you. Let me work from there.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like starting on third base.
Mm-hmm.
But there's that level of that I think going forward, everyone's going to have to be at. I think it should be mandatory for college students, but I think for all people go in the workforce, having a basic understanding or a basic fluency of both AI and analytics is going to be necessary. Then we've got the people who aren't just fluent, but they understand enough about how it works to be able to see where can I use these different tools and how do these different tools fit together. And then the last kind of categorization I'd have would be kind of the builders. There are going to be some people who are very technically oriented who are going to be the ones doing the actual coding. Most people aren't going to fall into that group. I would imagine most people fall into the group where I would put myself of kind of the informed user of I'm well aware of what's out there. I know enough about the details to see how I can put it to use in a particular application. And while we can talk about largely thinking about it from an AI perspective, I think the same conversation holds when it comes to analytics. I'm a big fan of Excel because if I can do the job in Excel, most people are going to be familiar with it. They're going to be comfortable using something that I deliver to them in Excel. For years I taught a course where the entire purpose of the class was, here is data in Excel, let's build a functional tool in Excel. And the reason for it wasn't necessarily that, it wasn't that Excel was the most powerful tool on the market, but it was the tool that virtually everyone had available to them. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of people where that's the level where they're at. It's like, okay, I've got my data in Excel. There are people who are going to look at data and say, okay, I might not remember how to do the statistics, or I might not know how to implement a machine learning algorithm, but I know what's out there. I know what I can ask for. And having that knowledge allows them to kind of be conversant, right? And then you've got, again, that kind of, data scientist, kind of that specialized data scientist. And I think the place where, we're seeing both AI and analytics come together is kind of, again, smoothing out that pipeline. So I recently finished up a project for a client where they are a Python shop, right? Everything they do has to run on their internal platform, and it has to be in Python. Well, I learned MATLAB decades ago and have been reluctant to kind of learn a different programming language, but I'm able to use generative AI to say, take my code in the language that I know and convert it into Python. And was it perfect? No, but it was able to get me 80 to 90% of the way there. And then I was able to kind of go in and say, okay, because I have kind of that foundational knowledge of coding, I was able to do that tweaking. So I wasn't starting from scratch.
Yeah. So David, in the choice of skills that you were talking about, right? Years ago, I used to say the top 3 skills, right, that we need to be in this tech world are Excel, SQL, and shell scripting. So I'm dating myself over here, right? Some sort of a scripting language. And then over the last several years, I replaced the third one with Python, right? So today, if you do Excel, SQL, and Python, you pretty much have enough to be able to get to, like you said, right, the 80-90% of being that informed technical user. It doesn't mean you have to write code, right, to be able to just get enough familiarity with how all of these.
Well, I'm of a generation that's only got one of those, which is Excel. So I have a question from the audience here. With so many businesses starting to adopt AI, where do you see the most immediate opportunities for companies to leverage AI for competitive advantage?
Yeah. So like we were discussing, right, AI is a broad stroke. There are definitely, right, the predictive AI and the generative AI. And we all have been using Gen AI, right, for a long time, unbeknownst to us. Anytime we were using it on the search and the rest of the search is filled up, right, you ask which movie and then Google finishes the rest of it. That is generative AI, right? So we had been using generative AI. It just was at a word level. And now it is happening at a paragraph level and pages level and so on, right? So I would basically categorize it between the use case on the predictive AI versus the generative AI, right? On the predictive AI, where companies are using are essentially, like for instance, in case of healthcare, right? Medical imaging, being able to look at, right, radiologists looking at the various patterns in terms of what the X-rays and so on and so forth. From a molecular biology standpoint, right? Every industry, there is that predictive capability that is also enhanced right now by the Gen AI side. Specific to Gen AI, we are looking at across various functions. So if you look at it from a marketing standpoint to create all of your collateral, work through the creative process. Within the HR side, job descriptions that I was mentioning earlier, being able to create your employee service chatbots, use, right, your co-pilot to be able to create your first draft. And of course, right, the better they are integrated into your applications, the easier it is. Right now, co-pilot as an AI is integrated into your Outlook and so on systems. What we are working on is AI to be infused and embedded into your business applications, right? So when you create a job description, if I, let's say, want to create a prompt on my own, which is different from how you do it as two different managers, they're all going to look and feel different, right? The brand of the culture in the company is lost. Similarly, on the marketing side, right? The collateral, there needs to be that brand presence felt. How do you basically systematically bring that? That is where enterprise applications are coming in, where everything that is being made easier is done through the four walls from a security and scalable standpoint to bring it to the end user within the enterprise.
Interesting. David, you got any thoughts?
I think, I go back and forth on this because, I think there's still a lot of potential for AI. The question about competitive advantage is a tough one because the tools that are out there, everyone's got a lot of these tools. Part of where I think the competitive advantage is going to come from are your own assets. The data that you have that someone else does not have. So how can you best leverage that combined with advances in AI? Because that's that's something someone else is not going to be able to replicate. So I think a lot of what we're going to see with AI is going to be inward focused, right? The improvements in productivity, getting things done more quickly. But I think a lot, if you start thinking about marrying the AI with your own assets and what you are already doing, so that what you're producing is distinct compared to everything else that's in the marketplace. Because one of the concerns that's been raised, again, from a marketing lens as well, if I can produce content using AI, is if everyone starts to do that, now everything starts to look pretty similar.
Yes. And I noticed that on some websites and some brochures, it was like, oh, I've seen that image before and somewhere totally different, used for a totally different thing, and that merging to a sort of a gray mass in the middle, it seems to be something to be aware of. I do want to encourage and invite the audience to post their questions in the Q&A section or the chat. We're monitoring both, so please feel free to put your questions there, and we'll do our best to answer them. There is another question around. This is one for you, David. Around how does goizueta and how do you think about it when you're thinking about an audience of professionals? How do we prepare business leaders to effectively use AI? I know I saw you in the classroom a couple of weeks ago. You were talking to a group of executives around applications of AI. Can you share some sort of key takeaways?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we do really well is we take a multidisciplinary view of this. In a lot of educational institutions, you'll see kind of AI or analytics being largely driven by the information systems group or the operations research group, and while they're heavily featured in the work that we do in these analytic and AI spaces, we've also got faculty spanning business functions that are working in these spaces. So whether it's marketing, finance, accounting, management, we've got faculty from all of these areas that are working with AI, understanding kind of the appropriate use cases, in some cases identifying what those limits might be. So for example, kind of chatbots were mentioned. Are they always a good idea? Or are there some cases, maybe it's some consumers, maybe it's some industries where, you know what, chatbot might not be the right solution for you necessarily to deploy. So I think that's one thing that Goizueta does particularly well. The other thing that I think we as a university do very well, our president and provost launched what they call the AI Humanity Initiative. And Emory may not be the first name that comes to mind when you think about technology, but the way in which Emory has approached AI is somewhat unique in taking a holistic approach to AI. So not just focusing on the engineering aspect or the computer science aspect, but really thinking about where is this technology going to touch people. And so that means we've got faculty that are looking at this in, on the healthcare side. What are the potential applications of AI to improve, diagnoses? What are the potentials to improve healthcare operations? We have faculty looking at this from an ethical perspective. Over in the law school, we have faculty looking at this from a copyright and IP perspective, and that's one that is very central to looking at it from a business perspective. But we've also got faculty in Goizueta that are looking at the applications, whether it's to analyzing analyst calls, earnings reports. How are companies adopting these technologies, and what is the expected impact that these technologies are going to be able to have? So I think we've taken a very broad look at what the implications of AI are going to be for both on business and on society.
Thank you. Guru, there's a question for you around, do you still see resistance to data-driven decisions at organizations? Or are people embracing data-driven decisions? And if so, are they coming into any sort of downfalls because the only thing they're looking at is the data, the specific data that's been presented to them, and not perhaps some other types of data and information?
Yeah, so obviously, right, from a data-driven decision-making perspective, right, businesses have always made decisions on data, right? We may have called it explicitly or not, but regardless, right, one area where it is becoming even more apparent is now everybody's flooded with so much of data that we are starting to talk about it in the context of data storytellers. How do you bring a insight into, right, a memorable way to inspire you to action? Because everybody is bombarded with data, so that for sure is there, but how do you craft it in a narrative that basically sticks and competes in the mind share of all the other, right, data driven approaches that are currently going on? So to be able to use that, and it again goes back to that change management and adoption aspect of it, how do you essentially bring the humanized aspect of it, right? So bringing data along with that human emotion to be able to make it stick. That is something that we are seeing.
Yeah, and that's interesting.
I'm so glad to hear the term data storytellers, because that's really what analytics has become. It's what analytics has been all along, and it just kind of highlights the importance of, you're working with people. You've got to build that persuasive case. It just happens to be backed by data and the corresponding analyses that have been done.
Yeah, and it certainly brings in, I think, back to what you were saying, David, about the strengths of the school and Emory, that it's not just one lane. You've got to be able to influence. You've got to be able to tell that story. You've got to be able to be compelling, and in order to be successful, you have to be thinking about the change initiatives that need to be put in place. You need to be thinking about everybody who's world you are going to disrupt in some either major or minor way, to do something new.
And if I could, I would
Please.
just get another lens that we've got to be mindful of, again, as technology keeps on marching forward. There is an environmental cost associated with AI, right? There is an energy issue that has to be grappled with. I think it was both Microsoft and Google for the first time in years did not have a reduction in kind of their carbon footprint, largely because of the explosive growth of AI. And so part of the business challenge is really finding what is the right solution for the problem that you have at hand, right? I think I saw one report that said, if you're using generative AI just as like a search engine, it's 10 times more energy that is used per query. Right? And so, if we're concerned about the environment, all right, the search engine might be the right tool. So it's not just saying, okay, generative AI is going to be this solution for all of our business problems that we can imagine applying it to. It may be that energy costs are going to be significantly higher in the future because of what that demand looks like. And so from a kind of making the business case, it might be that, yes, there's an AI-based solution, but there might be a simpler solution that is more efficient, gets us 95% of the way there. So that's another dimension that we've got to be thinking about how we make these decisions with regards to.
David, very well said, right? I mean, that is not from an energy perspective, right? That is definitely there. And even from a business case standpoint, right, in terms of the cost of compute and so on. And that is where these business applications, what we are seeing is, it may be the same chatbot that you were interacting with before, right? But to be able to field those questions and say, hey, some of these are just a lookup directly into my database. That's your straight SQL. Some of these are more your traditional enterprise search, which you already have systems on, and then some are going to be able to use the generative AI. So in other words, the interface is the same. How do you amalgamate all of those various technologies and provide the right combination to leverage on the back end, consequently, right, decreasing your both carbon footprint as well as right cost of operations.
So just that really underscores the importance of not just bolstering competence in the technology per se, but in all of the decision making and around it, and the sort of the understanding of what's the problem we're trying to solve here, and what's the best way of doing it, so that more holistic perspective really becomes critically important, so that people aren't just chasing the next bright shiny object.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the example that, sorry.
Go on, Guru.
No, so Nicola, the example, the way we use is, you don't want to be using generative AI when somebody's asking for your PTO balance, right? How much time do I have? You don't want to make up a number, right? You want it to go look it into the system and tell exactly what is in there. But there are use cases for which, obviously, right, you want to be able to use that generative content. But when you're interfacing through the same layer, that is where, right, the control mechanisms happen on the back.
Mm-hmm. So I'm just being very aware of people's time, and we will be wrapping up right on the hour, if not a few minutes before. David, you've been intimately involved in the suite of online courses that we've been developing. Curious if you can perhaps sort of lay out for people what those are and what some of the thinking behind those that you think makes them a powerful learning experience.
Sure. So let me start by talking about what we're doing in the data and analytics space. This is really intended for it's designed with the intent of guiding the development of more of a strategic mindset. So this is not a statistics class. This is not a machine learning class per se. It's developed from the standpoint of, if I have a business problem, how do I approach that problem in a systematic way? How do I think about it in terms of data availability? How do I think about it in terms of analytics that could be applied to solving that particular problem. So we'll discuss some of the kind of standard statistical machine learning based methodology that's out there, but with an eye toward how can I put this into practice and use it in terms of driving the organization and solving particular business problems that I might have. And the AI coursework is kind of developed through a similar lens. So it's providing that foundational exposure that I think everyone should have to understand what's out there. Also providing a wealth of applications as far as what has been done already. So a lot of cases of what are companies doing today. So these companies, it runs the gamut from, it could be marketing applications like how can I make campaign development more efficient? How could I do personalization? But then we'll also look at case studies. For example, I know one of the cases that we look at is Moderna, so well regarded for its COVID-19 vaccine. Well, their CEO came out and they've partnered with OpenAI and said, we've got a goal to launch, I think it's 15 new products in the next 5 years. And how are we going to pull that off? And I think one of the things that I love about that particular case study is it highlights the need for that kind of underlying cultural change within an organization, saying, all right, business unit by business unit, where can you use this particular technology? So I'd say the lens that we've taken developing both the analytics coursework as well as the AI coursework through is from a business perspective, from a strategy perspective. Quite honestly, if you're looking for nuts and bolts, if you're looking for foundations of LLMs, if you're looking for how do I build a generative model from scratch, these are not the courses for you. The coursework was deliberately designed with kind of an application mentality and a business strategy mentality.
Well, thank you. I'm just checking to make sure there are no further questions. So just sort of summarize, this has been fascinating. I thinking about this sort of data as enabler, moving to data as the product, the structured to unstructured, the democratization, the move from thinking about this as the domain of data scientists and people with masters of science and business analytics and not in the domain that I live in is one that is really I think critically important. And I also that thinking about how do we use these tools and how do we use them for to make our work more productive, to make our lives more productive, and to do it. I loved how you brought in, David, the energy component of this, because that's on that macro, on that sort of community level, that's critically important. It's important to future generations, and it's important to the prices of energy that all of us pay when our power bills arrive in our inboxes. So that strategic holistic approach is wonderful. Guru, any last comments from you that you think we should note? You're muted.
Sorry, yeah. No, one thing I would say is, right, over the last decade or so, definitely there are a lot more, right, focused initiatives around data analytics, AI in enterprises, academic institutions, and so on. And ultimately, like we were discussing today, the ability to pair it with industry, sector, functional knowledge, that is essentially where, right, to be able to help get to that next level in terms of making it application oriented, right? So the other day I was at an event and a lot of masters kids, right, was trying to actually work with them on. Everybody was doing, right, data science, machine learning, and so on, things that I could not even relate to, right, compared to where I used to do, right, years ago. And these are all very smart kids. And the ability to bring them along with the industry or sector knowledge, that is essentially where, right, they are starting to differentiate in the market.
Mm-hmm. David, any last thoughts?
I think these skills in the past, there were such high barriers to entry, right? And we had kind of these specializations where, okay, this is my lane, this is your lane. And I think what we're seeing a lot more, what we're hearing a lot more of is what the technology is doing, what kind of these courses are designed to do is equip you so that, you're not just in your lane, but you're able to converse with folks from other specializations and probably make more valuable contributions when you're working in teams.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Guru, and thank you, David. And I think based on what you've said, David, I should sign up for them. So looking forward to the launch of the new set of courses, and looking forward to continuing the conversations with you, David, and with you, Guru. Thank you for your time, and thank you everybody for your time. Please check out the chat to make sure we've put some materials in there, we've put some links in there so that you've got some additional information. With that, I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day. Thank you.
Thank you all.
That's all.